Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 4, Chapter 19. Alexei Alexandrovitch had not foreseen what would happen if his wife should recover after she had obtained his pardon. This mistake appeared to him in all its seriousness 2 months after his return from Moscow. But if he had made a mistake, it was not alone because he had not foreseen this eventuality, but also because he had not understood his heart till then. Beside the bed of his dying wife, he had given way, for the first time in his life, to that feeling of pity for the griefs of others, against which he had always fought, as one fights against a dangerous weakness. Remorse at having wished for Anna's death, the pity with which she inspired him, but above all the joy of forgiving, had transformed Alexei Alexandrovitch's moral anguish to a deep peace, and changed a source of suffering to a source of joy. All the difficulties that he had thought insoluble when he was filled with hatred and anger became clear and simple now that he had loved and forgave. He had pardoned his wife, and he pitied her. He had forgiven Vronsky, and since his despair, he pitied him too. He pitied his son more than before, because he felt that he had neglected him. But what he felt for the newborn child was more than pity. It was almost tenderness. Seeing this poor little weak being neglected during its mother's illness, he looked after it, prevented it from dying, and before he was aware of it, became attached to it. The nurses saw him come several times a day into the nursery, and, a little intimidated at first, they gradually became accustomed to his presence. He stayed sometimes for half an hour, silently gazing at the saffron red, wrinkled, downy face of the sleeping child, who was not his own, following her motions as she scowled and puckered her lips, watching her rub her eyes with the back of her little hands, with their round fingers. And at these moments Alexei Alexandrovitch felt calm and at peace with himself, seeing nothing abnormal in his situation, nothing that he felt the need of changing. However, as time went on, he felt more and more that he would not be permitted to remain in the situation which seemed natural to him, and that nobody would allow it. He felt that, besides the holy and spiritual force which guided his soul, there was another force, brutal, all-powerful, which directed his life in spite of himself and gave him no peace. He felt that everybody was looking at him and questioning his attitude, not understanding it and expecting him to do something. And especially he felt the unnaturalness and constraint of his relations with his wife. When the tenderness caused by the expectation of her death had passed, Alexei Alexandrovitch began to notice how Anna feared him, how she dreaded his presence and did not dare to look him in the face. She seemed to be always pursued by a thought she dared not express, that she too had a presentiment of the short duration of their present relations, and that, without knowing why, she expected some move from her husband. Towards the end of February, the little girl, who had been named Anna for her mother, was taken ill. Alexei Alexandrovitch had seen her one morning before going to the ministry meeting, and went to call the physician. When he returned at 4 o'clock, he noticed an Adonis of a lackey, in stock and bare skin, holding a circular lined with white fur. "Who's here?" he asked. "Oh, the Princess Yelizaveta Fyodorovna Tverskaya," replied the lackey. All through this painful period, Alexei Alexandrovitch noticed that his society friends, especially the feminine portion, showed a marked interest in him and in his wife. He noticed in them all that veiled look of amusement which he saw in the lawyer's eyes, and which he saw now in those of the lackey. When people met him and inquired after his health, they did so with the same half-concealed hilarity. They all seemed delighted, as if they were going to a wedding. The presence of the princess was not agreeable to Karenin. He had never liked her, and she called up unpleasant memories, so he went directly to the nursery. In the first room, Seroja, leaning on the table with his feet in a chair, was drawing and chattering merrily. The English governess, who had replaced the French woman soon after Anna's illness, was sitting near the child, with her crocheting in her hand. As soon as she saw Karenin come in, she rose, made a curtsy, and put Seroja's feet down. Alexei Alexandrovitch caressed his son's head, answered the governess's question about his wife's health, and asked what the doctor said about the baby. The doctor said nothing was out of the way with it. He ordered baths, sir. "She's in pain, nevertheless," said Alexei Alexandrovitch, hearing the child cry in the next room. "I don't believe, sir, that the nurse is good," replied the English woman decidedly. "What makes you think so?" It was the same at Countess Paul's, sir. They dosed the child with medicine while it was merely suffering from hunger, sir. Alexey Alexandrovitch considered for a few moments and then went into the adjoining room. The child was crying as she lay in the nurse's arms, with her head thrown back, refusing the breast, and without yielding to the blandishment of the two women bending over her. "Isn't she any better?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch. "She's very worrisome," replied the old nurse in an undertone. "Miss Edwards thinks that the nurse hasn't enough nourishment for her," said he. "I think so too, Alexey Alexandrovitch." "Why haven't you said so?" "Whom would I say it to? Anna Arkadyevna is still ill," replied the old nurse discontentedly. The old nurse had been in the family a long time, and these simple words struck Karenin as an allusion to his position. The child cried harder and harder, losing its breath and becoming hoarse. The old nurse threw up her hands in despair, took the little one from the young nurse, and rocked her in order to pacify her. "You must ask the doctor to examine the young nurse," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. The young nurse, a healthy-looking woman of fine appearance, sprucely dressed, who was afraid of losing her position, smiled scornfully and muttered to herself as she fastened her dress, at the idea of anybody suspecting that she hadn't enough nourishment. "Oh, poor little thing," said the old nurse. Alexey Alexandrovitch sat down in a chair, sad and crestfallen, and followed the old nurse with his eyes as she walked up and down with the child. As soon as she had placed the baby in the cradle, and having arranged the little pillow had moved away, Alexey Alexandrovitch rose and went up to her on tiptoe. For a moment he was silent, and looked with melancholy face at the little thing, but suddenly a smile spread over his face, and still on tiptoe he left the room. He went to the dining-room, rang the bell, and sent for the doctor again. He was displeased because his wife seemed to take so little interest in this charming baby, and he wished neither to go to her room nor to meet the Princess Betsy, but his wife might wonder why he didn't come as usual. He crushed his feelings and went towards the door. A thick carpet deadened the sound of his footsteps as he approached, and he unintentionally overheard the following conversation. "If he were not going away, I should understand your refusal, and his also. But your husband ought to be above that," said Betsy. "It's not for my husband's sake, but my own, that I don't wish it, so say nothing more about it," replied Anna's agitated voice. "Da, however, you can't help wanting to say good-bye to the man who shot himself on your account. It's for that very reason that I do not wish to see him again." Karenin, with an expression of fear and guilt, stopped, and would have gone away without being heard, but, considering that this would lack dignity, he went on his way coughing. The voices were hushed, and he went into the room. Anna, in a grey wrapper, with her dark hair cut short, was sitting in a reclining chair. All her animation disappeared as usual at the sight of her husband. She bowed her head and glanced uneasily towards Betsy. The latter, dressed in the latest fashion, with a little hat perched on the top of her head, like a cap over a lamp, in a dove-colored dress, trimmed with bands cut bias on the waist on one side, and on the skirt on the other, was sitting beside Anna. She sat up as straight as possible and welcomed Alexey Alexandrovitch with a bow and a sarcastic smile. "Ah," she began, affecting surprise, "I'm delighted to meet you at home. You never show yourself anywhere, and I haven't seen you since Anna was taken ill. I learned of your anxiety from others. Da, you're a wonderful husband." She gave him a friendly, flattering look, as much as to say that she approved of Karenin's behavior towards his wife. Alexey Alexandrovitch bowed coldly, and kissing his wife's hand, inquired how she was. "Better, I think," she replied, avoiding his look. "However, you look feverish," he said, emphasizing the last word. "Oh, we talked too much," said Betsy. "It was selfish on my part. I'm going away now." She rose, but Anna, suddenly flushing, seized her quickly by the arm. "No, stay, I beg of you. I must tell you. No, you." She turned towards her husband, while the color increased on her neck and brow. "I cannot, nor do I wish to hide anything from you." Alexey Alexandrovitch bent his head and cracked his knuckles. "Betsy has told me that Count Vronsky wishes to come to our house to say good-bye before he goes to Tashkent." She spoke rapidly, without looking at her husband, anxious to get through with it. "I've said that I could not receive him." "You said, my dear, that it would depend on Alexey Alexandrovitch," corrected Betsy. "Da, no, I cannot see him, and that should be not lead." She stopped suddenly to question her husband's face. He wasn't looking at her. "In short, I do not wish." Alexey Alexandrovitch approached and wanted to take her hand. Anna's first impulse was to withdraw her hand from her husband's, but she controlled herself and pressed it. I'm very grateful to you for your confidence, he began, but looking at the princess, he stopped speaking. What he could easily and clearly decide when by himself became impossible in the presence of Betsy, who was the incarnation of that brutal force, independent of his will, but which obliged him in the eyes of the world to renounce the ruling power of his life, his love, and generous feelings. Oh, Proshchaite, my treasure, said Betsy, rising. She kissed Anna and went out. Karenin accompanied her. Alexey Alexandrovitch, said Betsy, stopping in the middle of the boudoir to press his hand again in a significant manner, I know that you are an extraordinary, magnanimous man, and I love her so much and esteem you so highly that I'm going to give you a bit of advice. However disinterested I may be in the matter, let him come. Alexey Vronsky is the soul of honor, and he's going to Tashkent. I'm very grateful to you for your sympathy and your advice, Princess. But the question is, can my wife see anybody or not? That's for her to decide. He spoke these words with dignity, raising his eyebrows as usual, but he felt at once that whatever his words had been, dignity was inconsistent with the situation. The sarcastic and wicked smile with which Betsy greeted his remark proved it beyond a doubt.